All right. Well, Michael, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with me.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do.
Okay, my name's Mike Sonnevelt. I am a COO and a co-host of a podcast, COO of Self Evident Ministry. We run the Self Evident podcast. Our ministry's goal is really to show, the constitutional foundation of this nation, but to really enlighten people on the Christian values of our founding fathers and to give people the connection that a lot of times they don't hear other places. A lot of times they're called deists, or they're considered, some of them, atheists. Like Samuel Adams. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, he was an atheist." You look at his tombstone and it's anything but. And you hear his last words and it's anything but. He claims Christ, and so through their own quotes, through their own information, through their writings, we just really show that their faith was a very big influence on how they set up this nation. So that's, we do national speaking, and then we've got the weekly podcast.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I did check out your Instagram. What I saw there, like this, I like your guys' perspective because I'm a sold out Christian too. And I think what caught me was your name. Self Evident Ministries. So before we go any further, because I definitely want to get into like this whole deist thing, because I hear that a lot too. So I like to kind of hash that out a little bit. But before we do, like, why Self Evident for a minute? Like, why Self Evident Ministries?
I love that question. So Self Evident, when you look at the founding documents, right, there's a very obvious term that everybody knows. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And you look at that, and what it's really saying is we hold these truths to be that, and it goes on to say, what are our inalienable rights? Our inalienable rights are handed to us from our Creator, from God. So these rights are rights that God has given us. And what we like to point out is those rights are not given to you from the government.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations with atheists before about this, and they kind of pushed against the whole, why are you getting God involved into the country's government? And I said, no, you have to understand, even if you don't believe in God, it's much better to say that your rights are handed down to you from an authority above your government, as opposed to your government being the authority to give you your rights. Because if they can give them, they can take them.
Exactly.
So that we felt that term self-evident really fit, of like, this is just true. This is just duh. In a way.
Okay. All right. So no, that's really dope. I like that. Like self-evident, the whole it does say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Yep. And so that's always interested me, just in the fact that, it says we're created equal. And so based on that alone, that's where I get a lot of my core message from. It's because we're all created equul. We shouldn't be treated less than or greater than because we're all equal, right? Absolutely. Especially when we come to the foot of the cross.
Absolutely.
We really see where we are. But so talk a little bit more about this whole idea of these founding fathers not being deists, because that's what all the time, right? Because you hear someone like Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine seemed like towards the end of his life completely rejected God, right? And he would be like a firm guy. So but we only know so few of the founding fathers. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of times that you get one or two sides. You get one side that says all of them were super devout Christians no matter what until their ending days, and then others that say, well, most of them weren't. Just like today, they had varying levels of where they were at, and especially, some of them early on in their days weren't so much religious and ended up very religious, or the other way around. But you look at some of what they said, and in their writings about how to set up the government, moral and upright people, only for moral and upright people is this going to work, correct? Now, when they mean moral and upright, they're not just talking about good people, because we have to remember that the standards they had set were those Christian standards. So what they're really talking about is somebody who follows God's law is a moral and upright person. And this gets into why they set it up the way they did. The kind of the philosophy behind the whole setup was you need to have a moral and upright people, okay, a society that at least respects God, in order to have a constitutional limited government. If you don't have that moral and upright people, your government suddenly has to make more and more laws, which becomes more authoritarian. So I know that's a bit of a trail, but one of the things that really interests me is their whole philosophy on why they did what they did, right? And you look at the first act of Congress was a 2-hour prayer. You know, a lot of people say you can't mix religion and government. You can't have them having their religious beliefs in the public sphere. But you look at their actions, these were the guys who wrote it. And these were the guys that were instituting prayer and instituting days of fasting and having Congress pay to print Bibles for schools. So we have to go one of two ways, correct? You know, either all of that information is a lie, or we've decided that their actions aren't actually consistent with what they wrote and how they felt about the setup of the government. You know?
No, that's very true. Like that's interesting because I have a good friend of mine. He has that. Well, I guess we're getting to know each other. I work with him, and he has his master's degree in U.S. history, his undergrad in U.S. history, and he's about to start working on his PhD in U.S. history. And so one of the things he brings up is that like where the founding fathers were, and he talked about how some of them were deists, and he talks about how some of them weren't. And so he said he's like it's really hard to pin down like each person. You have to read them for themselves.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I was like, okay, I can respect that because my knowledge of it is growing as I talk to people like you and him. And so that's why I like having these kind of conversations because I get to learn in the process of, you know, quote unquote, hoping to make America civil again.
Yeah.
Right?
I love that. And you just made me think of something. Benjamin Franklin's a very good example. You know, a lot of people, what's a deist? A deist is somebody who believes that God wound up the clock and stepped away, correct? Yeah. So there was one point where they were all really bickering and arguing, and it was about to all fall apart. And Franklin stands up and basically says, look, we've gotten this far because of our prayers and our reverence to God. Now we're fighting amongst ourselves. The last thing we need to do is forget God. We need to all get on our knees and pray about this. That's not a man that's just a deist. That's a man who believes that the Creator is divinely intertwined in the going-ons of the daily occurrences. And so I think a lot of times people, they throw out a statement of, oh, well, Benjamin Franklin was a deist without going the full context of who they really were and the things they did to really show differently. You know, but somebody that you can check out is William Federer, and he's got a ton of books, and the guy is just brilliant. He actually lives down here in Florida, and we've been really close with him. And he's got a book, and I'll have to send you a picture of the title and everything. This book is chock full of all of the founding fathers' quotes and writings on various topics, including their faith. And so he just went ham on all of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, send that over and I'll definitely check it out. That sounds like a really good resource. I'll definitely check it out. But just to switch gears a little bit, I want to ask you. So you guys sound like you're constitutionalists. Like, I don't know if you guys take a label, but how would you guys like label yourselves as far as like the political sphere goes?
Yeah, conservative constitutionalists, probably with a taste of libertarian in there. I don't, you know, we definitely we don't label ourselves Republican, although we tend to be more on that side of the two-party system. But there's a lot that we're frustrated with the Republicans. So we believe in the principle of the Constitution. And so if it isn't consistent with the Constitution, we're having questions about, okay, why is this being done? What's going on with it? So yeah, I would say conservative constitutionalists, probably the best way to label us.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's probably why I like you guys so much. Because I labeled myself a libertarian, but then I tag on conservative only because like I know libertarians hold to certain views that I would disagree with. Like they believe in the right to choose, pro-choice, and I'm not pro-choice by any stretch of the imagination. And so like that's like one of my, but it makes no sense to me why libertarians are pro-choice. If you believe life is precious and each individual is your own individual, and you believe everyone has their own rights, life starts at conception, bro. Like, come on. It's like why like libertarians? Let's be a little more consistent in what we're saying. But my primary goal is I have a biblical worldview. That's where everything stems from. Primarily.
Do you think that's where your libertarianism came from? Was the biblical roots and led into that?
Yeah, slightly. Yeah, I would say like this idea of having inherent rights and not allowing the government to infringe on those rights. That's where my libertarian comes in, because like God creates each individual. So since He's done that and He's given us the rights that we have, to have someone superimpose certain things on you, they'd be taking the place of God.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so like that's why I think like limited government, like I would always say government's a necessary evil. Like it's needed, but it needs to be very small and limited. I'm not an anarchist, because I think that's just mob rule.
Yeah.
But I would say like definitely like a small mitigated government, very low taxes. I get the whole render to Caesar what is Caesar's, but at the same time, I don't think Jesus was arguing for taxes at that point.
No.
But I think the clear thing there was more about the conversation he was having with that guy. But taxes was something that, like, that's probably my biggest thing. It's like, and I always talk to my wife about it. I don't understand why people just think that the government should take your money when you can just volunteer it. Like, I would gladly give it over. Why do you have to, like, I don't have a choice. Like, you don't give me the freedom to choose. Like, you're taking my property. That's theft.
Yeah, so absolutely.
That's kind of the way I work through it. So that's how my Christianity leads me to more of a libertarian mindset. But also when it comes to like things like war and stuff, that would lead me more to a libertarian mindset. Like, not because that's an ugly thing. And, I'm not super stoked about this whole thing that's going on right now, with us being in Syria and Iraq. And so like the only war that I think I actually agree with is probably like World War II. I could definitely see why we got into that, because that is a defensive war, where some of them are kind of like, man, like, why are we over there now? Like, what's going on? So, yeah.
No, I'm with you. Especially the Christianity to the libertarian side. Massey and I, the founder of Self Evident, we've had a lot of conversations about God. One of the things that God cherishes most is free will. You look at, a lot of people ask the question about Adam and Eve, and why would God place the tree in the garden to give them that choice, knowing full well they're going to disobey? It's because He held free will sacred above mitigating risk. He gave free will with the risk of where they were going to take it. And so if we take one of the basic tenets of who God is, and God appreciates free will that much, who are we to decide that, well, we're going to run a government system that takes away as much free will as possible from people?
Yeah.
Instead, we should support the most, and God changes hearts and minds as opposed to just enforcing.
Yeah.
And I think, we get accused of being theocrats a lot.
Yeah.
You want Christian-run government. You want, this oppressive religious regime. We have to come back and say, no, what we really want is for God to change your heart and God to change the society and culture, and government to give that the best chance to flourish.
Yeah.
It can flourish under liberty. There's oppression and authoritarianism and control that can come whether from secular or religious,
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. So no, that's very true. And yeah, I do get that, like the theocracy and wanting like God to like, oh, you just want to have a modern day Israel. Like, no, 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 that was for a certain time, like not now.
Exactly.
But let me ask, like, so where do you think we stand here as a nation, like currently, when it comes to just like the political divide that we see? I mean, it's obvious now. I don't know why we keep saying we're divided. Like we are divided as a nation. Like, what's your thoughts on that whole thing?
Yeah, I agree with you that we're completely divided, and I think it's pushed and peddled because it's useful. Uh, as a nation right now, I think the biggest thing is we don't. I think a lot about this, and I think I've got a lot of different thoughts about where it could be coming from. I think it's got a lot of different causes, and you could go from something as simple as, say, collectivist influence,
Hmm.
which you look at, especially what was the communist direction or the communist idea to create new communism? It was to basically divide and conquer. They just used classism, which we do today,
Yeah.
eat the 1%. Um, but I really believe that one of the things that they saw that was unique was the racial sins of America, and that was a soft spot. So what do? You poke the soft spot and you say, look at this, look at this, look at this. So there are a lot of people who all they see is racial division as well as class division as well as gender division, and
Yeah.
there's a whole group of people that they're pulling everybody apart and putting them into their groups. And we stand here and we go, you're trying to get to individualism without having the individual. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
We're saying, look, we're
It's
already
true.
where you want to be. You just can't accept it's up to the individual's responsibility. So I think that's something that really divides this nation. And frankly, as a nation loses its faith and loses its respect for faith, it comes a point where they've got to fill it with something else. And
Yeah.
we're behind Europe maybe 20 years, 30 years. Like you watch really the demise of the church in Europe. And we're watching the same thing happen here now. And as that demise happens, something's got to fill in. So we're really in a tumultuous position right here. And I truly believe that once a culture has lost religion, whatever religion it is, it becomes tumultuous, it becomes divided, it becomes frenetic because there's nothing to hold everybody together.
Yeah.
Now, I believe Christianity is really the best thing to hold people together. It's just a matter, can we keep can we keep our faith and our relationship with God in order to keep that healthy culture? Israel
Yeah.
was a perfect proof of that. As soon as they started turning their backs on God, what happened? You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it destroyed itself from the inside out. I mean,
Yeah, decay.
corrupt kings and all this stuff. Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. Um, so like, I'm gonna ask. Feel free to pass on this one. But how do you guys feel about President Trump? Like, what are your thoughts on him?
No, I'm glad you asked that. So when we started this podcast, we were kind of sitting across from each other, and we both looked at each other and said, we don't want to do Trump. We Everybody talks about Trump, everybody
Yeah.
covers Trump, and what we found was you can't get away from him.
You can't.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't.
No.
He is everywhere. There are things that we think he does well, but we really rail against the things that he doesn't do well. And we don't like this tribalism that you could see coming a mile away.
Yeah.
The perfect example is I actually just recorded last night about the deficit. So at the end of this fiscal year, yeah, exactly. At the end of this fiscal year, we're going to be close to $1 trillion deficit. Tea Party, their brains blew out when Obama was running heavy deficits. They were getting taxed, the deficits were crazy, the debt was shooting up. Their brains went insane.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing anything from conservatives, Tea Party, Republicans about the deficit now. What happened?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the circles we run in, we've gotten people who have come back on us and say, you gotta, you got to support Trump. We need Trump right now. And we've got to tell him, look, we think there are things he does well, but character does matter. Decisions do matter. Principle does matter. And frankly, we see a lot of things that concern us. And you have somebody who, before he became president, was very kind of washy on his principles or what he stood for. He had plenty of Democrat policies that he supported or he didn't mind, but he's an opportunist. He's a deal maker. He does what he needs to do in a negotiation to get what he needs. That isn't necessarily something to rule him out, but it's something to remember. He's somebody who will tell you what you want to hear in order to get the best deal that he can. So there are times where we stand on principle that he's not going to stand there because it's not advantageous to him,
Okay. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, we like some of the stuff he does, but yeah, there's plenty that we're not happy about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think I hear that more from maybe younger conservatives than I do the older conservatives.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think there's a couple. It's not always just like one reason, right? I mean, I think it's always multifaceted. But I always like to ask about Trump because someone always has something to say about Trump. And you're right. Like you can't, because that was my whole goal when I remember I talked to my buddy I talked to a while back who we talked about the Mueller report and the things that were in it. And he was like, well, I want to talk about Trump. And I was like, no, I don't want to talk about Trump. He's like, no, we need to talk about it. And I was like, and so like the guy is impossible to get away from. Like you eventually have to, you have to talk about him.
Yeah.
And so we did the Mueller report, which we talked about Trump. So he got his way. But all right, so I'm gonna ask you two more quick questions. One is like we see what's going on in the Democratic Party right now with 18 candidates now or something like that.
Yeah,
17?
I think so.
And who do you see? Two questions. Who do you think is going to win? But who do you think would pose the biggest threat to Trump?
Okay, as far as who's going to win, man, that is a tough question right there. I could actually see Warren. If I don't think Biden can hold it together anymore. I think Biden's kind of just he's showing who he is, and people are like, this guy is not all there. So I think Biden's out. Bernie burned most of his base when he laid down for Clinton after he got screwed, and I think most of his base said, I can't do it anymore. So I would honestly say Warren, or I think Pete Buttigeg has a good chance. I think actually Tulsi Gabbard would be the toughest one for Trump. And I felt bad for her that she got screwed out of this debate. And the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot with that one because she's the only one who can really speak to the moderates. If she's the only one who's got the chance to get the moderates to coalesce behind her, because all the others are talking crazy, and you're getting a lot of Democrats who are saying, yeah, they're crazy. I can't do this. I just can't do it, So and Gabbard, I actually I don't want to say I support everything that she stands for, but man, there's plenty of stuff that I'm like, I can agree with you on this, or I can see where your principle is on it. You know?
Yeah. Like that's so funny. I think the exact same thing. I was talking to I was talking to my friend the other day, and I was saying the same thing. I was like, I don't know if I could ever vote for her. I said,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of things that she's saying. Like she was just on the Rubin Report, and I listened to her on there. I'm like, yeah, no, I can vibe with that. Like I see where you're coming from, and like she's my favorite in the group. So yeah, that's funny
Yeah.
you say that. And I actually have documentable proof that back early this year, like in January or February, I said Elizabeth Warren was going to win.
Really?
Yeah, I've been saying that for the longest time. I was like, and for some odd reason, I said it's either going to be Elizabeth Warren or it's going to be Kamala Harris. But I said I don't think it's going to be Kamala Harris because I was like, I thought she was too weak. But
Yeah.
then when she came out and kind of dogged on the Mr. Gaff, I forget his name.
Beto?
No,
Is that
not
who she
Beto.
was? No, it wasn't Beto. She
Biden.
was
It was Joe
Biden. Yeah.
Biden. When she got on Biden, I was like, oh, maybe she does have a little fire. But then Tulsi Gabbard completely took whatever she had and threw it on the ground, smashed it, destroyed it, burned it, just like put it in the toilet, flushed it, just got rid of it. Like whatever she had, it's gone. And like her poll just went just
Yeah.
as it should have, because what she said checked out to be all true. Like, so yeah, you're done. So, but I do have to ask about Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Now, he claims to be a Christian, but he's homosexual, and he says a lot of things about Christians, and he kind of uses the Bible however he chooses,
Yeah.
as if nothing has context. But that's another conversation. But what are your thoughts just on Mayor Pete,
Mayor
right,
Pete.
as running, claiming to be a Christian?
I think in terms of Christian versus non-believer, he's probably the most dangerous person. And it's because he's so intelligent and he loves philosophy. So if you look kind of into his history, he's immersed in philosophy. So he knows logic, he knows reason, he knows philosophy, and then he adds in faith on top of that. And I know it's very easy for Christians to go, well, he's gay. So, and that's a valid point. I'm not disregarding that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just indicative of how he views the Bible. So when you look into him and you look into research, he loves social justice Christianity or progressive Christianity. He very much, like you were talking about, render under Caesar. What he sees that is, okay, as a Christian, you pay your taxes to the government so the government can take care of you, which, like you had said, that's not what Christ was talking about there. Christ was talking about, look, Caesar owns what he owns on earth. God owns what is God's, okay?
Yeah.
Know the difference. So, yeah, you pay your taxes because you're supposed to. You're supposed to follow the law unless it contradicts with God's law. But as far as Mayor Pete's concerned, there's been this whole movement for hundreds of years of progressive Christianity. And so they're not inventing anything new, but him and Reverend Barber and what a lot of these Democrats throw out is progressive Christianity, aka we're told to take care of the poor, we're told to take care of the widow, we're told to take care of the oppressed. What you conservatives are saying is screw them. You don't care about them. What the conservative is saying is it's not the government's job, it's my job. It's my responsibility to
Yeah.
take care of the poor, the widow. And I think what Mayor Pete does really well is he's great at pulling those Bible verses and using enough context to get to his own point of view, when in reality, if you look at the grander context of Scripture, he's going just enough to the side of it to get what he wants, but I think distort the spirit of what Scripture is saying about stuff like that. And I don't think he's got a serious contention for the candidacy, but who knows? I mean, maybe there are enough Christians to kind of coalesce around somebody who actually shows character. And that's another thing that I think is interesting is if you compare him to Trump, his character outside of the homosexuality is much better than Trump's. And then if you weigh Trump's sexual history, who's from secular point of view, who's better? Trump's considered an adulterer, 3 marriages, all the stuff he's said about women. Mayor Pete happens to be gay and in a committed marriage with a single man. So in the world's eyes, Pete is far and away a much moral man than Trump is. It's the Christian who says, but he's prideful of sexual sin, which we don't excuse Trump from, or at least we should not excuse Trump from. So we can't excuse Mayor Pete from that either.
Yeah. I completely agree. And because he's in the line of progressivism, as far as the Christian movement goes, he's, they are totally in lockstep with the whole idea of marriage not being defined by God in the Bible. Like, we could talk all day and night how you want to hate on the other passages, but God clearly lays out in the Bible marriage is between a man and woman. Like, the affirmative is like far outweighs the negative, to where you'd have to tell me why it says male and female, but what he meant was not male and female. And
that's I love that you point that out, because that's so true. And I think a lot of times what people do is they forget what's not being said. And you're right, the positive and the affirmative is one man, one woman united as one flesh. And then the symbolism of the bride of Christ, correct? The church being the bride of Christ. So marriage is obviously a very big deal in the Bible. You don't see anything that affirms homosexual marriage, one man and one man. So that's not even discussing the verses that are against homosexuality. There's nothing that affirms homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
Now take it one step further and go to the verses that talk about homosexuality, especially Romans 1. It walks through this process of, it's not just homosexuals are bad. What it is it shows the process that people take in order to get to that point. And what it says is they reject God.
Mm-hmm.
They start worshiping animals. Then they worship themselves, their own bodies. And then God allows them to be taken away by their own desires. And Romans 1 ends in that respect of saying, and so they give away their natural desires for lusts of the flesh, for the lust of man lusting after another man. So it's this progression that Christians see, and Christians point out, if we're at that point, this isn't good. We've definitely gone the wrong direction. And so some will say, well, Leviticus, well, if it's covered in the Old Testament and the New Testament, we have to pay attention to why is it talking about this?
Exactly.
And I'm with you. I've wondered, like, how can the Episcopal Church, among other churches, just avoid this?
Exactly.
Like, how do you teach the Bible week after week, getting up, making sermons, and somehow avoid something that is so clear and definite against this? And it's sorry for rambling. It's just it's something that I feel needs to be taught, is that we can't just view it as, well, it's sin, they're evil. We view it as all of us are broken one way or another. We're broken sexually, right, as well. So the adulterer's sin is sin, just like the homosexual's sin.
Mm-hmm.
Sexuality is a decision. It's a behavior. And I'm not saying homosexuality is a choice, right? I think the activity or the action is a behavior. I think there are plenty of people who, through whether environment, and actually a study just came out recently that disproved that there's a genetic link.
Yeah.
So
I saw that.
we do away with the genetic link. So now we have to say, okay, environment plays a very large role in this. So environment, which a kid has no control over, goes through this environment. They whatever happens. They end up being pulled towards this sexual desire that makes sense to them. And as they explore it, it's reinforced.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just like a kid who looks at porn, it's reinforced. He does it once, there's pleasure, something feels good, something almost feels right. So he does it again, and he does it again, and he does it again, because pleasure, it's good for a season. It's fun for a short season. And as the person continues, it becomes more and more ingrained, and it becomes a part of who they are.
Yeah.
And I think the real problem is, I have friends who are gay, and they've said, I feel like I don't belong because I'm being told on one side that this is all my identity is. And on the other side, I'm being told I'm wrong for who I am. And, it's a very long conversation, but they are being told this is your identity. No, it's a desire within you.
Yeah.
Desires are good, they're bad. We have to weigh them all out,
Yeah.
But
So, I mean, we could spend a whole nother episode on that.
Absolutely. So, yeah, sorry for rambling. But
oh, no, you're fine. I told you, if you wanted to, by all means, go right on ahead. But hey, Michael, I do want to say thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to come and chat with me on here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Anytime you want to connect with us, we would love to connect with you, man. So.
All right. Sounds good. So that I will probably end up taking you up on that.
All right. Absolutely.
All right.
Please.
All right. Well, yeah, I will. But hey, you have a good rest of your evening, and
thank you.
take care, man.
All right. Take care. Have a good night.
You too. Later.